Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled Evermore, the City of Creation. Act 1, A Whisper Beneath the Morning Sun. The town of Brindlehaven stirred gently beneath the touch of morning light. Tucked between the hills and the coast, the town carried the scent of salt and soil, its streets paved with weather-worn stones and memories too old for anyone to trace. It was here, on the corner where Willow Lane curved into Elder Street, that two figures met under the dappled shade of a sycamore tree. Avon, tall and tousle-haired with a poet's soul and a clockmaker's patience, leaned against a crooked lamp-post, fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of honeyed tea. His shirt was crumpled in the charming way only he could pull off, and his eyes gray like an incoming storm tracked the flutter of birds across the sky. Across from him, nearing with the kind of quiet energy that always seemed to leave a trail of curiosity behind her, came Lyra. She wore a moss-green coat lined with faded embroidery, and her boots bore the dust of places she never spoke about. Her backpack clinked softly with trinkets, and the scent of bergamot followed her like a signature only the wind could read. "You're early," she said with a half-smile, brushing back strands of raven hair that had slipped from her braid. "I'm punctual." "You're just time-traveling as usual," Avon replied, returning the smile as he passed her a cup from the bakery down the street. They stood there a moment, letting the silence breathe between them. Neither needed to rush. Today was a slow day, a day they'd marked on their invisible calendars weeks ago. A day for the market. Every third Saturday, the old train depot transformed. Stalls unfurled like petals at dawn, each booth brimming with something rare, something forgotten, or something freshly made with aching care. Artisans, collectors, storytellers, and wanderers all found their way there. Some claimed the market had no fixed vendors, that it changed its shape depending on who was seeking what. Together, Avon and Lyra set off, boots tapping against the cobbled stones as the sun rose higher. The closer they got, the more the air shifted smells of cinnamon bread, roasted chestnuts, dried flowers, and antique paper danced around them. "Do you think they'll have the map again?" Lyra asked. "The one that redraws itself?" Avon tilted his head. "Only if we're truly lost enough to need it?" "Then we might be in luck," she said, her grin sly. They passed through the wrought iron arch that marked the entrance to the Brindle Market. The moment they did, sound bloomed around them, laughter, bargaining, the creak of wood and wheels, the hum of a cello from somewhere unseen. Colorful awnings fluttered overhead like patchwork clouds, casting moving shadows on their path. Avon slowed as they reached the first row of vendors. "We start with food or stories?" "Food is a story," Lyra replied, and pointed toward a cart draped in navy linen and lined with brass tins. The vendor was a wiry woman with sun-worn skin and eyes like amber glass. She introduced her wares not by name, but by feeling. "This one," she said, gesturing to a biscuit tin edged in runes, tastes like the day your heart first broke and you survived anyway. Lyra chose a small parcel wrapped in paper stitched with crimson thread. Avon bought a jar of something the vendor only called memory honey. They walked and nibbled and traded impressions like critics of dreams. The market twisted unexpectedly, as it always did, and led them toward the second quadrant where the stall tables were made from old pianos, and the merchants wore coats with too many pockets. Here, stories were bottled, stitched, or spoken aloud. Avon paused before a stand filled with books that looked half alive. Their spines shifted when he reached toward them, some shuddering, others purring faintly. One book, bound in bark and mistletoe twine, fell open at his touch. He flipped through the pages slowly. On one, a sketch of a small boy holding a compass shaped like a moth. On another, a phrase in slanted ink. The way back is only visible when you're already leaving. Lyra was watching him. Does it remind you of something? It reminds me of everything, he whispered. They didn't buy the book. Some things weren't meant to be owned. But they carried its words with them, like a stone in the shoe you're oddly fond of. Next came the artists, the ones who painted with oils, shadows, or laughter. One man drew portraits using only people's reflections on spoons. A girl sculpted birds that flew for exactly 5 minutes before turning back to clay. Lyra spent too long at a booth selling unfinished paintings, canvases that seemed to complete themselves only when you stopped looking. She almost bought one that showed a path through trees lit by invisible lanterns, but something in her hesitated. "I'll come back," she said softly, though they both knew she wouldn't. Around noon, they sat on the edge of the fountain in the center of the market. A mechanical fish swam in circles beneath the water, occasionally spouting riddles in 6 languages. Avon pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. It was old, creased and stained, its ink faded in parts. It was the list they'd made years ago. Places to visit. Things to do. Promises to keep. "Still got it," Lyra murmured, leaning against his shoulder. "Of course," he said. "It's the only thing I never lose." From behind them, a call rang out, bells, real and not, signaling that a new section of the market had just opened, the archive. A place that never opened the same time twice. They exchanged a look, their tea long gone and their curiosity only just beginning to hum. "You ready?" Avon asked. Lyra stood, brushing crumbs from her coat. "Let's get lost a little further." And with that, they vanished into the market's next breath, 2 souls adrift, wandering the place where stories came to trade skins and where nothing ever stayed the same. Act 2, The Archive of Forgotten Things. The entrance to the archive had no door. Instead, a veil of shimmering threads hung between 2 towering mirrors, each reflecting not what stood before it, but fragments of some distant elsewhere. Lyra reached out first. Her fingers passed through with a hum, like dipping a hand into a melody half sung. Beyond the veil, the world dimmed. It wasn't dark, just quieter. more muted, as if wrapped in soft cloth. The ground beneath their boots became wooden planks, slightly warped with age. Shelves rose in spirals from the floor, some no taller than a child, others reaching endlessly into a ceiling lost to fog. "This place wasn't here last time, was it?" Lyra whispered. Avon shook his head slowly, turning in place. "No. But I think it's been waiting." The archive didn't smell like old books. It smelled of petrichor and ink still wet. Every few feet, a flickering lantern bobbed in the air, illuminating tags tied to objects, tags that pulsed like living things. They passed a violin strung with spider silk, its tag reading, "The last note played before a farewell kiss." A faded coat draped over a mannequin, its collar still stained with snow. Worn when she almost said yes. A glass bottle containing 3 grains of sand and 1 echo. The moment he realized he was too late. Lyra ran her hand gently across the shelves. "Every item here. Someone left behind," she said. "But not discarded. Preserved. Their memory anchors," Avon said. "Emotional fossils." A sound caught their attention, a soft click, like a typewriter. They followed it down a corridor that shifted subtly with every step. The shelves leaned closer, their contents rearranging like spectators adjusting for a better view. At the corridor's end stood a small desk. Behind it, an old woman with ink-stained fingers and gold thread woven into her braid was typing on a machine that had no keys. Her eyes flicked up as they approached. "Welcome," she said. Her voice was not old, it was ageless, like something spoken from the bones of a tree. "You've brought something with you. Something that wants to be remembered." Lyra and Avon exchanged glances. "We didn't bring anything," Avon began. The woman raised a brow. "Oh, but you did. You carry it in your hesitation, in the space between words when you speak to each other." Lyra stepped forward. "Are you a keeper?" "I am a scribe," the woman said. "And this archive writes not what you say, but what you mean." Before they could respond, the typewriter began to click on its own. Letters formed on the page. Slowly, like a secret admitting itself. He still remembers the time she disappeared without warning. She never told him why. He never asked. And yet here they are, walking again as if the silence never grew roots between them. Lyra flinched. Avon took a sharp breath. The scribe watched without judgment. "Do you want to see it?" she asked. "See what?" Lyra's voice was faint. "The thing you never said. The moment that still echoes." Neither of them answered. Instead, the shelves behind the scribe rearranged themselves with a sigh. A book slid free, thin, leather-bound, its cover unmarked. The scribe handed it to Avon. The book opened itself. Inside, they saw a memory they had buried. A rainy night at a train station. Lyra standing beneath the awning, suitcase in hand, staring at Avon through the blur of droplets. She was crying, but smiling. He didn't chase her. He didn't call out. Just a memory. But when Avon looked closer, the image shifted this time. Lyra stayed. She dropped the suitcase. She ran back. The book offered both truths, both possibilities. This archive doesn't tell you what happened, the scribe said gently. It shows you what could have. What still might. Lyra closed the book softly, holding it to her chest. I think we've seen enough, Avon murmured, his voice thick with something he couldn't name. But the archive wasn't done. As they turned to leave, the scribe offered a final gift, a map, folded in 7, drawn on skin-thin parchment. It won't show you where to go, she said. It will only respond when you walk with intention. Uncertainty clouds its ink. Lyra accepted the map with both hands. They stepped back through the mirror-veiled entrance. The market greeted them like a breath returning to the lungs. Music rose again, scents flowed back into the air, but the silence of the archive lingered like the warmth left by a fading touch. Neither of them spoke for a while. They didn't need to. Each carried a piece of the past now, no longer forgotten, just unfinished. And somewhere deep in the folds of Lyra's coat, the map began to unfurl on its own. Act 3, The Market of Mirrored Wishes. The map, though fragile as moth wings, pulsed faintly in Lyra's pocket. Each step they took away from the archive left behind the thick silence of memory and welcomed back the music of the market. The cobbled streets, twisted in impossible geometry, now curved into a path neither of them recalled seeing before. The stones glimmered subtly underfoot, as if lit from beneath by some unseen glow. Without needing to speak, they both turned down the newly revealed lane. This quadrant of the market was quieter than the others, not silent, but hushed, as if every soul within it had agreed to whisper. The air held a strange clarity, like the pause between a question and its answer. At the heart of the lane stood the mirror pavilion. It shimmered like it was woven from glass threads, the structure seeming too delicate to stand, and yet it loomed wide and still. Intricate archways formed of metal vines cradled large oval mirrors, each standing taller than a man. These mirrors didn't reflect the market. They reflected something else entirely. Lyra approached the nearest one. For a moment, it showed her as she was, coat wrinkled, hair windblown, curiosity sparking. But then the surface rippled, and the image shifted. She saw herself on a balcony, painting under moonlight. The city below was unfamiliar, towers and stars she'd never known. But her hands moved with purpose, and laughter echoed from the room behind her, where voices called her name with affection. She stepped back, breath caught. Avon had wandered to another mirror. His was darker, its surface like still ink. Then it shifted. He saw himself at a desk in a lighthouse, quill in hand. Stormlight flashed behind him through a circular window. In front of him was a letter signed Avon Elias. And there, pinned to the wall, was a photograph him and Lyra, years older, smiling beneath a cascade of autumn leaves. "These aren't memories," he said. "No," a soft voice replied. "They are wishes." A woman stood at the center of the pavilion. Her gown was stitched from fragments of reflection, each panel flickering with a different sky. Her hair shimmered silver blue, and her eyes held the calm of someone who had heard every wish and seen which ones would never bloom. "I am Sela," she said. "Caretaker of what could be." Lyra turned toward her. "Are these illusions?" Sela shook her head gently. "They are echoes from the moments you almost reached. Possibilities you once longed for but left behind either by choice or by circumstance." Avon stared at the mirror again. "So we're just walking through our regrets?" "No," Sela said, stepping closer. "Regret clings to what's lost. These are unchosen paths. Some still live in the seams of your soul." Lyra stepped back from the mirror and crossed to where Avon stood. "If we stare too long, we'll forget where we are." Avon nodded. But his gaze lingered. Sela gestured toward a set of crystal benches at the edge of the pavilion. "You are not here to choose. You are here to remember that choice is still yours." They sat. The map between them began to shimmer again. A new line unfurled, arcing toward a circle inscribed with glyphs that looked suspiciously like clocks melting into stars. "I know where it leads next," Avon said. "The pavilion of the clockmaker." Sela smiled faintly. "Ah. Time is never done with those who think they've escaped it." Before they rose to leave, Sela held out two items. To Lyra, she gave a pendant, a small mirror framed in brass. "This will not show you your reflection. It will show you what you refuse to see." To Avon, she gave a pocket watch. Its hands ticked backward, and the time it kept changed each time it was opened. "This does not measure hours. It measures when your heart last hesitated." They thanked her. There was nothing else to say. As they stepped out of the mirror pavilion, the market surged to life around them again. Voices rose. Colors deepened. And far in the distance, a bell rang, not of warning, but of invitation. The clockmaker was expecting them. Act 4, The Pavilion of the Clockmaker. They followed the curve of the market as it bent impossibly, like a hallway inside a dream, narrowing, then expanding again as if adjusting to the shape of their thoughts. The cobblestones beneath their feet grew smoother, the chatter of vendors dimming behind them. Even the colors of the awnings seemed to fade, replaced by a soft, silvery blue that coated the world in a pale gleam. Time, it seemed, was already thinning. The pavilion of the clockmaker stood at the edge of the market, near a canal where gondolas drifted silently, unpiloted. It looked nothing like a shop or a stall. It resembled a cathedral more than anything else, vaulted ceilings of stained glass that shimmered with light from nowhere, gears and cogs embedded into the walls like ancient fossils. A massive pendulum swung in the center of the space, slow and deliberate, casting rhythmic shadows across the floor. At the threshold, Avon and Lyra paused. "You feel it too?" he asked. Lyra nodded. "Something's different here." As they stepped inside, the air thickened, but not unpleasantly. It was like stepping underwater, or into memory. The silence was immense but layered, as though voices were speaking from within the very stones, too quiet to understand. Dozens of clocks lined the walls. None of them kept the same time. There were sundials that glowed in the dark, hourglasses that refilled on their own, water clocks dripping into inverted bowls, even a tree trunk whose rings slowly rotated, marking the passage of emotion rather than minutes. From behind the central pendulum, a figure emerged. The clockmaker. She was neither young nor old, her presence unbothered by such definitions. Her coat trailed behind her like an eclipse, stitched with thread that glinted like starlight. Her fingers were stained with brass and oil, and in her eyes shimmered galaxies that had long since gone dark. "You've arrived late," she said. Avon blinked. "Late for what?" "For the version of yourselves you thought you'd be by now," she replied, turning toward a massive workbench layered with half-assembled devices. Lyra stepped closer, fascinated. "Are these all timekeepers?" "Not quite," the clockmaker said, tapping one of the devices. "Some measure hope. Others record delay. This one," she pointed to a delicate spiral cage, "captures hesitation in its purest form." "And what about that?" Avon asked, gesturing to a nearby contraption shaped like a heart split in two, with each half ticking at a different rhythm. "That one is broken," she said simply. "It was made to help someone forget." "They remembered anyway." The clockmaker studied them both for a long moment. "But you haven't come to browse. You've brought something with you. The archive showed you a moment, perhaps a fracture. And the mirror pavilion gave you the shape of what wasn't chosen." She turned back to her bench, began to tinker with a device that looked like a compass missing its needle. "The question is," she continued, without looking up, "do you want to revisit a moment that still holds power over you? Or reshape it?" Lyra frowned. "Can you really do that?" "No," the clockmaker said. "But you can. My work is merely scaffolding." She reached into a drawer and withdrew a small, gear-shaped token. It glowed faintly in her palm. "This," she said, holding it out, "is a chronospoke. One for each of you." It allows you to enter a single memory but not just to observe. To walk through it. To speak. To listen. To feel. Avon took his cautiously. It felt warm and slightly heavy, like it carried weight far beyond its size. But be warned, the clockmaker said. Memories are not passive. Once you step inside, you must relieve what was, not just remember it. And the past does not always welcome visitors. A beat of silence passed. What if we want to change it? Lyra asked softly. The clockmaker looked at her with something like sorrow in her gaze. Then you must be prepared to carry the version of yourself who didn't. Lyra and Avon looked at one another. No words passed, but something settled between them. Agreement. Readiness. Or maybe just the need to stop running from the unspoken. The clockmaker motioned toward a wide platform made of interlocking gears. As they stepped onto it, the machinery below began to turn with a low, melodic hum. Lights spiraled upward along the stained glass columns, forming a dome of rotating stars. Close your eyes, the clockmaker instructed. And think of the moment you wish to re-enter. The one that still pulls at your breath when you least expect it. Lyra's grip tightened around the pendant from Selith. Avon reached into his coat and touched the backward ticking watch. The hum grew louder. Now, the clockmaker said. Step through. In a flash of motionless light, the pavilion vanished. They were standing on a train platform. Rain fell in silver curtains, soaking the stone tiles. A whistle blared in the distance. A suitcase stood by Lyra's feet. This was the moment. The last time she left. The moment Avon never stopped replaying. Except this time, they were both there again with eyes wide open, hearts not hidden by time's dulling dust. Now, said a voice that came from nowhere and everywhere. Say what you didn't. And just like that, time folded inward and they were no longer bound by memory. They were inside it. And everything could change. Act 5, the station between what was and what might be. The rain soaked through the platform as if time itself were weeping, but Lyra didn't flinch. Her boots were planted exactly where they'd been that day beside the faded yellow line, suitcase upright, hands clenched tight around the leather handle. The canopy above creaked with wind and memory. The train was coming. She turned. And there he was. Avon stood just a few steps behind, his coat damp, curls wet against his forehead, the watch from the pavilion of the clockmaker ticking in reverse against his chest. But this time, he moved. The last time, the real time, he had stayed rooted. Frozen. Watching her go. Words unspoken had crusted into silence, into scars neither of them wanted to prod open again. But this wasn't then. This was a second chance. Lyra, he said. His voice trembled. not with fear, but urgency. She looked at him, truly looked. And the world shimmered. Not around them, but within them. As if every heartbeat from that moment onward was being rewritten from the inside out. I never understood why you left, Avon continued. Not really. I told myself you needed space. That maybe it wasn't about me. But it was always about us, wasn't it? Lyra opened her mouth. Closed it. Rain traced rivers down her cheeks, but she wasn't crying, not yet. I didn't know how to explain it, she finally said. We were. Something held together by wonder and curiosity. But I was afraid if I stayed, I'd lose the version of myself I hadn't become yet. You thought I would keep you from becoming her. No, she said. I thought I wouldn't be brave enough to become her if you were still beside me. Because I loved you so much, Avon, that I would have chosen you over everything. Even my own voice. He stepped forward. Not rushed, just enough. Enough to stand with her under the brittle roof, the train's rumble rising in the distance. And now? He asked. Are you still afraid of choosing wrong? She shook her head slowly. No. Because now I know that some things don't have to be either/or. Sometimes the right person waits. The rain paused midair. Time cracked. And they both felt it. The world around them rippled like a reflection. Disturbed figures paused in motion, the train frozen at the far end of the tracks, raindrops like pearls suspended in the air. And between them, the chronospokes began to glow. Lyra looked down. The pendant given to her in the mirror pavilion shone like a tiny moon. Avon's backwards ticking pocket watch flared a brief golden pulse, then shattered into light. It wasn't violent, it was release. You weren't meant to carry it forever, a voice echoed. It was the clockmaker, not present, but present enough. The moment, once faced, no longer needs to hold you. Lyra blinked. The suitcase at her feet had vanished. Not because she chose to stay, but because the version of her who had left had already returned. I remember now, she whispered. The night I came back, long after the train left. I stood outside your door with nothing but a map I tore in two. But I never knocked. You did now, Avon said. And just like that, the raindrops fell again. Time resumed. But the world was different. The platform changed before their eyes. The gray of the stones warmed, colors blooming faintly beneath their feet. Lanterns lit one by one down the line, casting a golden haze through the mist. The air felt cleaner, as if regret had been rinsed out of the sky. A steam whistle called once, long and low, but the train didn't stop. It passed them gently, the sound not one of departure, but of acknowledgement. A soft goodbye to what had never happened. Lyra turned to Avon. Her hand reached out. Not to grasp, but to offer. "Walk with me?" she asked. He nodded, and they left the station side by side. They walked back through the memory, now quiet, through the rain-soaked streets that dried as they passed, through a door that hadn't existed before, edged with starlight and trimmed with brass, opening back into the pavilion of the clockmaker. But it had changed too. The gears had stopped turning. The pendulum had stilled. The stars above no longer spun in a dome but scattered freely in the stained glass ceiling, like constellations rediscovering their own names. The clockmaker stood waiting, arms folded loosely, smile thin but proud. "You didn't change the past," she said. "You understood it? That's the only magic worth trusting." Lyra handed her the broken pendant. Avon gave her the empty shell of the watch. "They're not broken," Lyra said. "They're just finished." "Exactly," said the clockmaker. She turned toward the door behind her, an arch carved in bronze, inscribed with the words, "To the next chapter." "You've earned the path ahead. And no, I won't tell you where it leads." "Good," Avon said. "We'd rather find out for ourselves." And so, with hands no longer weighed by what-ifs, and hearts stitched tighter than ever, they stepped through. Together. Act 6, The Quarter of Lost Things. The air in the pavilion of the clockmaker had grown still, like the calm before a storm. Avon and Lyra stepped forward, the door behind them creaking shut, and they were once again swallowed by the shifting expanse of the market. But this time, the market was different. Everything felt heavier, imbued with an unspoken promise. They crossed through an archway they hadn't noticed before, and the path before them darkened, the atmosphere thickening. This was not the bustle of the main market. This was the quarter of lost things, a place veiled in shadows and memories, where forgotten dreams went to rest, never to be reclaimed unless you were meant to find them. The cobbled streets narrowed into a winding alley, the walls covered in faded murals that told stories of things that never were, lovers who never met, journeys that never took place, songs that never had their words. At the end of the alley stood a large iron gate, rusted but intricately designed. It was marked with a simple engraving, "Not all things are lost, only waiting to be found." Lyra's fingers brushed the cool metal of the gate, feeling the pull of something familiar but distant. "I don't think we're supposed to be here," she murmured. Avon looked at her, the light from the lanterns casting long shadows across his face. "Maybe this place was always waiting for us." With a soft groan, the gate opened of its own accord, and they stepped through, entering the quarter. The space beyond was more of a room than a district, vast yet enclosed, stretching out like a labyrinth of forgotten pieces of time. The ground beneath their feet shifted with each step, a patchwork of cracked mirrors, peeling paper, and scattered items that seemed out of place: an old violin, a pair of silver shoes, a broken compass, all half buried in dust and rust. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and ash, like memories cooked on the edge of a flame. Everything here was once part of someone, Lyra whispered, her voice barely breaking the heavy silence. But it was left behind. Or forgotten. Avon stepped forward, his eyes scanning the abandoned relics. Maybe not forgotten. Just misplaced. The further they went, the more the quarter seemed to pull at their souls. A piece of paper fluttered by, its words unreadable, and a distant laugh echoed in the darkness, fading before they could locate its source. The air grew thick with things, with the essence of everything that had been lost, not just items, but feelings, emotions, paths never taken. They passed a forgotten clock, its hands spinning wildly in the wrong direction. The tick-tock echoed in their minds like the pulse of a far-off memory they couldn't place. Avon stopped in front of a crumbling bookshelf, its spines worn and cracked. He ran a finger along the titles, and one book slid free with a soft hiss. "Look at this," Avon said, handing it to Lyra. The cover was plain, but as she opened it, the pages shimmered with unfamiliar symbols, words she couldn't read, yet felt like she should have known. "It feels important. It's the kind of book you leave behind," Avon murmured, turning the pages. "Not because it isn't valuable, but because it's too valuable to carry with you." Lyra nodded slowly. She placed the book back on the shelf with a soft thud. The deeper they ventured into the quarter, the more it began to feel like they were treading in someone else's memories, like they were intruding on a secret, one that wasn't theirs to uncover. Eventually, they reached the center of the quarter. A large, stone pedestal sat in the middle, its surface worn and smoothed by time. On it rested a single object, a crystal, pulsing with soft blue light. It shimmered in the dim light, casting odd reflections that flickered like shadows of something unseen. Lyra and Avon exchanged a glance. There was something unmistakably powerful about it, something that beckoned them. "I think it's calling to us," Lyra said softly, her voice almost a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the fragile quiet of the quarter. Avon stepped forward, his hand hovering just above the crystal, but he hesitated. "Is it something we should take?" The air around them seemed to still, like the entire quarter held its breath. "Some things aren't meant to be taken," a voice spoke from the shadows. They turned quickly, startled, to see a figure emerge from the darkness, an old man, bent with age, but with eyes sharp and knowing. His clothes were tattered, and his beard long and tangled, but there was a presence about him, an aura that seemed to belong to a time far older than the one they were in. "You are here because you are meant to find it," the old man said, his voice low but clear. "But what you find may not be what you're looking for." "Who are you?" Avon asked, his voice cautious. The man smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "I am the keeper of the lost things." "The keeper?" Lyra echoed, her curiosity piqued. What do you mean by lost things? The things that were never meant to be forgotten. The things that slip through the cracks of time, hidden away from those who once held them. Some people forget on purpose. Others forget because they must. But all things here are waiting. Waiting for what? Avon asked. For someone to remember. The keeper walked slowly to the pedestal, his steps soft but deliberate. He touched the crystal, and the blue light grew brighter, then dimmed as if the crystal was breathing with the rhythm of his touch. Do you understand now? The keeper asked, his eyes locking with theirs. These things, these memories, these parts of you that you left behind. They aren't gone. They are simply waiting. Avon and Lyra stood in silence, the weight of the words sinking in. Their own forgotten parts, the paths they had abandoned, the choices they never made, were all here. Not lost, but lingering, waiting for them to turn around and choose again. Lyra stepped forward, her fingers brushing the edge of the crystal. She felt the hum of something ancient within it, something familiar. It wasn't a thing to be held, but a thing to be understood. The keeper nodded, as though seeing their thoughts unfold before them. The things we lose, the things we leave behind, they do not vanish. They wait, like the unspoken words between friends, like the regrets we never voice. And when you're ready, they will find you. With that, the keeper turned and began to walk away, fading into the shadows of the quarter, leaving them alone with the crystal and their thoughts. Avon and Lyra stood there for a long moment, letting the words settle. Do you think we're ready? Lyra asked. Avon looked at the crystal, the faint blue glow flickering softly. Maybe. But I think the question is, do we want to be? For the first time in a long while, Lyra smiled soft, but steady. I think I'm ready. And I think you are too. They took one last look at the crystal, then turned away. The quarter of lost things remained behind them, but its echoes would follow them always, in ways they didn't yet understand. Act 7, The Final Veil. The air had changed again. The moment they stepped away from the quarter of lost things, it felt like the entire market held its breath. There was no grand announcement, no heralding trumpet. Only a subtle shift, like stepping from one world into another. The cobblestones beneath their feet began to lose their sharp edges, softening into something more fluid, almost ethereal. Lyra and Avon walked in silence, their steps light but deliberate. The feeling of being watched faded, replaced by an odd sense of being called. But by what? By whom? They couldn't quite tell. Yet, it wasn't fear that gripped them, only an anticipation they couldn't shake. The market, in all its grandeur, was leading them somewhere. Somewhere final. At the edge of their path stood an archway draped in a deep, velvet blackness, its entrance impossible to see through clearly. There were no mirrors here. No clocks, no memories. Only a space where the edges of the world itself seemed to blur. The archway pulsed with faint gold light, but the light felt distant like stars too far away to touch. "Is this it?" Avon whispered, his voice barely carrying in the thick, humid air. Lyra didn't answer right away. She was drawn to the archway, her feet moving almost of their own accord. The feeling in her chest was different now, a kind of quiet acceptance. "I think this is where it all converges," she said, her voice steady but carrying a weight she didn't fully understand. "The final veil. Where everything we've been searching for ends. Or begins." Avon stepped closer. The space around them seemed to shimmer, like the veil itself was made of liquid night. His heart raced with an unfamiliar rhythm. "You're sure? Because this doesn't feel like something you walk into lightly." Lyra's hand brushed against the edge of the archway. It was cold, though not unpleasantly so. Like a whisper of winter wind at the back of the neck. "I've never been more sure." Without another word, they stepped through together. The world on the other side was unlike anything they had encountered. The market, its warmth, its colors, its music, all of it was gone. In its place was a vast expanse of space that stretched beyond their comprehension. There were no stars, no sky. Only an endless blackness, stretching to infinity. And yet, the silence felt heavy, as though every sound, every thought was suspended in this void. Before them, a figure stood. It was not human, not quite. It seemed more like a reflection, a shadow cast by the light of something far greater. Its outline was faint, but its presence filled the space. In the space between its movements, there was a sense of quiet authority. It was the keeper of this place, the one who held the threads of time in their hands. Lyra and Avon didn't have to ask who it was. They already knew. "You've come," the figure spoke, its voice soft but clear, echoing through the void. "Not everyone chooses to find the veil. And yet, here we are," Avon replied, his voice carrying a note of wonder. Lyra stepped forward, a mixture of uncertainty and calm crossing her features. "What is this place? What's beyond the veil?" The figure's form flickered, rippling like a reflection on the surface of water disturbed by a gentle breeze. "This is where all things converge, the edge of everything, and the beginning of all possibilities. The place where choices made, unmade, and forgotten meet." Lyra took a breath. "Is this where we decide what comes next?" The figure tilted its head. "Not decide. Understand. You are not the only ones who have walked this path. Many have come before you, and many will come after. But each of you must face what is beyond this place on your own." Avon's heart thudded in his chest. "What does that mean? Are we supposed to make a choice?" "Everyone makes choices," the figure said, its voice becoming more distant. but not everyone is ready to see the truth behind them. Are you ready? Lyra swallowed, her mind racing. She had spent so long running, avoiding. But now, here, standing before the veil, it felt different. It didn't feel like something to be feared, it felt like something to be embraced. Yes, she whispered, barely more than a breath. Avon turned to her, his hand brushing hers. What are we supposed to see? The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, it raised one hand, and with a slow, deliberate motion, it extended a shimmering thread into the void. Step forward, it said. And see. The thread pulled tight, and suddenly, the blackness around them began to shift. Images flickered at the edges of their vision, like a film reel left too long in the sun, warped, fractured. Memories, dreams, desires, regrets. Everything that had ever been felt or imagined was there, floating just out of reach. Lyra reached out toward the images, her fingers brushing against the flickering scenes. For the briefest moment, she saw herself standing at the edge of the sea, watching the waves crash against the shore, the wind pulling at her hair, her heart alive with anticipation. She had been there once, years ago, at the start of something she couldn't name. Something lost. But now, as she touched the image, it began to unravel. She pulled her hand back sharply. Avon stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the figure. What is this? Why does it feel so wrong? Because you see what could have been, the figure replied. The what-ifs. The roads you didn't take. The choices you never made. Why show us this? Lyra's voice broke the silence. We can't change it? No, the figure answered. But you can choose to understand it. Avon's fingers clenched into a fist. We can't keep running from it. No, the figure agreed. But neither can you hold on to it forever. That is the cost of memory. The world around them began to dissolve once more, the images fading into the blackness of the void. The figure, too, began to dissolve, its form shifting into a cloud of starlight, the shimmering thread becoming more distant. The void was silent again. Lyra turned to Avon, her face pale but determined. We can't keep hiding, can we? No, he said softly. It's time. She reached out for his hand. Together, they stepped into the void. And as they did, the world shifted once again, folding around them like pages of a book turning in the wind. Act 8, The Path of Unraveled Truths. The void stretched infinitely, a place where the edges of the world dissolved into shadow. No more boundaries, no more limits. It was as though time itself had folded back on itself, leaving only the sensation of movement. A sense of weightlessness. As if the very concept of being, of existing had blurred, leaving behind only the presence of now. Lyra and Avon walked together, though neither knew exactly where their steps were leading. All they knew was that they were no longer running. They weren't chasing anything. They weren't trying to hide. They were simply moving through what was left of the space between what they had been and what they could still become. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the silence felt less like an absence and more like a presence, an echo of something waiting to be understood. A small flicker of light appeared in front of them, and as they walked toward it, the shape began to materialize, a door, carved from shadow and starlight, its surface inscribed with delicate, shifting patterns. "The last door," Lyra said softly, more to herself than to Avon. Avon didn't reply. He simply reached for the door handle, his fingers brushing the cold metal. There was no hesitation now, no question of whether or not they were ready. They had already made their decision by being here. The door swung open silently. Beyond it, they were met with a sight they hadn't expected, nothing like the market, nothing like the pavilion, nothing like any place they had ever seen. This was a realm all its own, stretching out endlessly before them. At first, it looked like an empty expanse of white, a blinding, all-encompassing whiteness. But slowly, as their eyes adjusted, they began to see the shapes within it, patterns emerging from the vast blankness. They were memories. Not memories of their own, but of everyone, of every person who had ever walked through the market of mirrored wishes, of every soul who had passed through the quarter of lost things, of every truth that had been hidden, every choice that had been made and then abandoned. The shapes were fleeting, ethereal, like echoes of past lives. Some formed faces, others twisted into abstract lines and colors. They were all moving, shifting, creating an intricate web of moments that interwove, disappeared, and reappeared. And in the center of this endless sea of memories, there was a figure, a person they both instantly recognized. It was them. Or rather, it was the versions of themselves that had existed before all of this. The people they had been before the journey. Before they had made the choices that had led them here. Avon stood frozen for a moment, his breath catching in his throat. Is this us? Lyra nodded, her hand trembling slightly as she reached toward the figure that stood before them, mirroring their every movement. Yes, she whispered. But it's not us. Not really. This is who we were. Before. The figure of Lyra in the center smiled at her, but it was a smile tinged with something darker, something older, a sadness, a regret. This is where it all began, Lyra said softly, almost to herself. Avon stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the figure of himself. This is who we could have been, if we hadn't walked the paths we did. If we hadn't faced what we faced. But is that who we wanted to be? Lyra asked, her voice breaking through the haze of confusion that had begun to cloud her mind. Was that really us? The figure of Avon shifted then, its gaze meeting his directly. It was as if they were locked in a stare that spanned time itself, stretching back to every moment they had lived, every second they had spent fighting, running, and questioning. You didn't want to be the person you were, the figure of Avon spoke, though its lips didn't move. The voice came not from it, but from within them, from the place deep inside their hearts. Avon clenched his fists, fighting the overwhelming flood of emotions that surged within him. "No," he whispered. "I didn't. But I also couldn't become who I am now without going through all of this." The figure of Lyra, the version of herself from before, tilted its head as though in thought. "And what about you, Lyra? Who did you want to become?" Lyra stepped forward, her eyes meeting her own reflection. "I wanted to be someone who wasn't afraid to stay. To not run away when things got hard." Avon looked at her, his gaze softening as he understood what she meant. "But you didn't run because you were afraid. You ran because you thought you needed to find something that wasn't here. Something you had to become on your own." "I thought that if I stayed, I'd lose myself," Lyra admitted, her voice steady now. "But what I didn't understand was that in running, I was already losing myself." The two versions of themselves of Lyra and Avon seemed to fade, their shapes rippling into the air like smoke. But before they disappeared completely, the figures spoke one final time. "You've already found it," they whispered, their voices now intertwined with the very fabric of the realm around them. And then, they were gone. The white void began to shift again. The memories swirled into a vortex, pulling everything into a single point. And then nothing. There was no light, no sound. Only silence. But it wasn't empty. It was the silence of understanding. Lyra and Avon were no longer in the place they had been before. They were no longer the people they had been before. The weight of the memories, the burdens of choice, had lifted, leaving behind something new, a sense of purpose, a sense of peace. Avon reached for Lyra's hand, his fingers entwining with hers. They didn't need to say anything. The space between them had closed, and the silence felt like home. "We're here," Lyra said softly. "Together." Avon nodded, his heart light in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. "Yes, we are." And the truth, at last, was simple. They were not lost. They were never truly lost. They had simply needed to find their way back to each other. And so, with hands held tight, they stepped forward into whatever came next together. Act 9, The Path Beyond the Veil. The world around Lyra and Avon shifted again, but this time, it was different. There was no more uncertainty, no more haze. Everything felt clearer. The air felt full not of fear, not of expectation, but of possibility. They had crossed the threshold. The veil was gone. The journey, long and winding, had reached its end, but not the end of their story. They stood together, side by side, at the edge of the path that stretched into an unfamiliar horizon. A soft breeze stirred the air, carrying with it a scent of something sweet, of new beginnings. The market, The archive, the quarter of lost things, the final veil, all of it had faded into memory. But it wasn't a painful memory. It wasn't a past that haunted them. It was a place where everything had been woven together, a place where they had learned. Avon exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Do you think we've found what we were looking for? Lyra took a step forward, the cool wind tugging at her hair. She felt different now. Lighter. As though a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying had been lifted. I think we were never meant to find something, she said, her voice steady. We were meant to understand. Avon turned to look at her, his face soft with the quiet understanding that had grown between them over the course of their journey. He nodded. Understanding is more than just answers. Exactly, Lyra replied, her smile growing. It's about knowing the questions we never asked. About realizing that we don't have to carry everything. Some things we let go. And in that, we grow. They stood there for a moment, letting the quiet of the world settle around them. The path before them wasn't straight, it wasn't even clear. It wound, twisted, and led into a distance they couldn't yet see. But for the first time, neither of them was afraid of the unknown. We can go anywhere now, can't we? Avon asked. Lyra turned to him, her smile softer than before, but filled with something new, something rooted in the understanding they had gained, together. Yes, she said. Together. Without another word, they began walking. As they moved forward, the world around them seemed to shift in harmony with their steps. The path twisted, and as they walked, the scenery began to take shape. Fields of wildflowers stretched out beneath a sky that sparkled with the colors of a setting sun. The horizon gleamed with possibility. They passed by lakes that shimmered with the reflection of stars, forests that whispered secrets only the wind could hear, and mountains that stood in silent, ancient watch. The world here was not a destination, it was an unfolding, a vast landscape that felt alive, just as they did. But, just as the journey had begun, they came to a point where the path forked once more. Lyra stopped. The path split into two directions, one that led upward, toward towering, snow-capped peaks, and another that wound downward into a valley, where the horizon disappeared into a mist of golden light. What do we do now? Avon asked, his voice quiet. Lyra stood at the fork, her gaze fixed on the two paths. Both paths held the unknown, but both felt right in their own way. She thought for a long moment, then turned to him, her heart open, no longer burdened by the weight of what-ifs or regrets. We choose the path we can walk together, she said, her voice steady. Without hesitation, they moved forward. Not with the urgency of those seeking answers, but with the peaceful resolve of those who had already found what they needed, each other. As they took their first step down the path, the world began to shimmer and transform once more, as though the landscape itself was acknowledging their choice. The ground beneath their feet softened, the air became filled with the scent of jasmine and oak, and the sky above them painted itself with hues of pink and lavender. The world opened up in a way that only those who had traveled the most challenging roads could truly understand. And just ahead, the path stretched on, winding toward the unknown, toward the endless horizon, where the only thing they knew for sure was that they weren't alone anymore. They had found each other. And with that, everything else past, present, future had fallen into place. Fire, and so, we reach the end, or perhaps the beginning. This story isn't about finding the final answer, but about the choices we make, the paths we walk, and the people we choose to walk them with. Lyra and Avon have reached the moment where they can choose, but not just choose the path in front of them. Their journey is still unfolding. It always will be. Do they move forward, into the future, or do they linger, savoring the moment? That is for them to decide. The end of this story is only the start of the next chapter, their chapter. Act 10, The Endless Horizon. The road ahead seemed endless, stretching far beyond the edge of the world they could see. Lyra and Avon walk side by side, their steps in sync, the rhythm of their journey carrying them toward the unknown. There was no map here, no clear signposts. Just the open sky, the soft hum of the earth beneath their feet, and the quiet companionship of each other. The world around them was shifting again, not in the grand, sweeping changes they had witnessed before, but in subtle ways. The air felt warmer now, filled with the promise of new experiences. The trees along the path began to bear fruits they had never seen before, vibrant, glowing fruits that pulsed with an inner light. The flowers along the edges of the road began to hum softly, their petals unfurling with each step they took. Lyra looked up at the sky, which had faded from the soft pinks and lavenders of dusk into the deep blues of night. But this night felt different. It wasn't the cold, starlit sky of distance and time. It was a sky that felt close, intimate. Like it was welcoming them home. This place, she murmured, more to herself than to Avon, it's alive, isn't it? Avon's gaze followed hers, tracing the constellations that seemed to move with them, never staying fixed in one place. It feels like it's breathing with us, he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of understanding. Like it knows who we are now. Lyra smiled, the faintest hint of sadness in her eyes. I think that's why we're here. To finally know. The thought hung between them as they walked, unspoken but understood. They had come so far from the market's chaotic bustle, to the peaceful silence of the archive, to the final veil where they had truly faced the path they'd always been on. And now, here they were, at the crossroads of everything that had come before, and everything that could come after. They reached the crest of a hill, and before them stretched a vast, open valley. It was bathed in a gentle glow, the kind of light that doesn't come from the sun or the moon but from something far more ancient, a light that seemed to emanate from the land itself. In the distance, Lyra could make out the faint outline of a city, its towers and spires rising into the sky, glowing softly against the backdrop of the valley. It wasn't a city like any they had seen before. It didn't feel made by hands, but by something more elemental. As though it had grown organically from the very earth beneath it, its streets winding and flowing like rivers, its buildings shaped by the hands of time itself. Is that? Lyra started, her voice a whisper. Avon's hand brushed hers, a reassuring touch. It's the place we were always meant to find. They began their descent into the valley, the path now growing more defined, more familiar. The air around them became thicker, charged with the feeling of something important just beyond reach. It was as though the very land recognized them, acknowledging their journey, their choices, and their understanding. As they neared the city's entrance, they were greeted not by gates or walls, but by an open archway that seemed to dissolve into the air itself, as if the city was welcoming them without question. In the center of the archway stood a figure, a woman, her features soft but timeless, her eyes carrying the depth of the universe within them. She was dressed in flowing robes that shimmered with the colors of the earth, the sky, and the stars. She didn't speak at first, but her presence was enough to make Lyra and Avon pause, as if her very being was asking them to stop and reflect. The woman's gaze shifted between them, her eyes locking with each of theirs. And then, as though she had known them forever, she spoke. "You have come a long way," she said, her voice like the rustling of leaves, soft and knowing. "And you have seen the truths that others fear to face. But you have not yet seen the most important truth." Lyra and Avon exchanged a glance, both of them feeling the weight of the words settle around them. "What is it?" Lyra asked, her voice steady but carrying the echoes of every question that had led them here. The woman smiled, though it wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of understanding, of recognition. "The most important truth is not what you've already learned," she said softly. "It is what you have yet to understand. The truth that everything you've seen, everything you've experienced, has led you to this moment, to this place. The truth is not about what has passed. It is about what you choose to do with it." Avon stepped forward, his brow furrowing slightly. "And what is that? What do we do now?" The woman's eyes softened, and she raised one hand, gesturing toward the city behind her. "Now, you choose what happens next. You choose the future you wish to create." The ground beneath them rumbled gently, like the heartbeat of the world itself, and the city before them seemed to pulse in time with it. The city was alive not just in its structure, but in its essence. It was waiting, not for them to simply enter, but for them to choose to make their mark. Lyra's heart quickened. She had always feared choice, the weight of it, the pressure. But now, standing here, in this moment, she realized that the true power of choice wasn't in the act of choosing itself. It was in the willingness to embrace what came after. "We've been given this," Lyra said slowly, "not to fear what we don't know, but to create what we will." Avon smiled at her, the understanding shared between them. "Then let's create it. Together." And with that, they walked forward, through the archway, into the heart of the city. The streets were lined with towering trees that seemed to glow from within, casting a soft, ethereal light on everything around them. The city was a fusion of nature and architecture, of old and new, of the things that had been lost and the things yet to be found. In the distance, the spires of the city reached toward the sky, touching the stars themselves. But the most beautiful thing of all was not the city, nor the land, it was the feeling of home. They had come full circle. They had faced their past, learned from it, and were now walking into a future of their own making. They didn't need to know what lay ahead. They had already discovered what was most important. They had each other. And that, in the end, was enough. Act 11, The City of Evermore. Lyra and Avon stood at the threshold of the city, the gates wide open before them. The air here was different. There was a vibrancy to it, a sense of warmth and life, as though the city itself was alive and breathing with them. The streets ahead curved gently, winding through a blend of green space and ancient stone, blending nature and architecture seamlessly. It was a city that felt as though it had always existed, yet was still becoming. The buildings were not fixed in time, they seemed to shift with the wind, adjusting as if they were part of something ever evolving, constantly in motion. As they walked further in, Lyra felt a sense of peace settle over her, a peace she had never known. There was no uncertainty here, no anxiety about the choices ahead. The city embraced them, offering them a place in its vast, eternal design. The streets were not empty, though. People moved along them, walking with purpose and ease, their expressions calm, yet filled with an underlying understanding. The people didn't rush, they didn't speak in loud voices. Instead, there was a quiet hum of life, a connection between everyone, as though the city itself wove them together in some unseen way. "Where do we go now?" Lyra asked, her voice filled with awe as she looked around. Avon didn't answer immediately. He took in the beauty of the city, the flowing streams that cut through the streets, the gardens filled with flowers that whispered in the wind, the grand spires that seemed to rise endlessly toward the heavens. "I think," Avon said, his voice thoughtful, "that we don't need to go anywhere. We've already arrived." Lyra looked at him, her gaze softening as she understood what he meant. They had come so far, traveled through so many places, and yet, in this moment, it felt like they had finally found a place they had been searching for all along. "You're right," she whispered. This feels like home." They continued walking, the gentle hum of the city surrounding them like a melody. They passed shops filled with shimmering artifacts, pieces of art that seemed to move on their own, books that glowed with ancient knowledge, and trinkets that hummed softly with the energy of time itself. At the center of the city stood a grand plaza, open and expansive, where fountains flowed with liquid light and trees stretched their branches toward the stars above. The air was thick with magic, with possibility, as if anything could be created here, at the heart of the city. As they approached the center of the plaza, a figure appeared before them, tall and graceful, with a face both familiar and unknown. It was as though this figure had been waiting for them, and yet, they had never seen him before. "Welcome," the figure said, his voice both deep and gentle, as though it carried the weight of the universe itself. "I have been waiting for you." Lyra and Avon exchanged a glance, Their curiosity piqued. "Who are you?" Lyra asked, her voice steady but filled with wonder. The figure smiled, a knowing smile that seemed to carry the weight of all the knowledge they had gathered. "I am the keeper of the city of Evermore," he said. "I am here to guide those who arrive at the end of their journey." "End?" Avon asked, his voice uncertain. "But we're just beginning, aren't we?" The keeper's smile deepened. "Ah, yes. You are beginning something new. But this city is not a place for endings. It is a place for creation. It is where the journeys that never quite end are born. It is where the unspoken truths are brought to life." Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine as she took in the keeper's words. This city was more than just a place. It was a conduit, a place where all the things that had once been lost could now be found. "What does that mean for us?" she asked. The keeper's eyes softened. "It means that your journey has led you here not by chance, but by choice. You have arrived at a crossroads, one where you must decide what to do with the knowledge and truths you have discovered." Lyra and Avon exchanged a glance. The weight of the keeper's words was heavy, but it wasn't a burden. It was an invitation. "You have learned," the keeper continued, "that everything you sought to understand was not an answer but a question. Now, you must choose, will you stay here and create something new, or will you return to the world you came from, armed with the knowledge you have gained?" The choice lay before them, one that neither of them had expected. They had journeyed so far to find this place, this city of endless possibilities, but now they had to decide what to do with it. Avon's heart raced as he thought about the world they had left behind, the choices, the regrets, the pain. And yet, as he stood here, in this city that seemed to hum with the possibility of rebirth, he realized that they no longer had to carry those things with them. They didn't have to go back to the way things were. "We don't have to go back, do we?" he said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet understanding. Lyra turned to face him fully. "No," she said softly. "We don't. We can create something new here. Together." The keeper's smile deepened as he stepped aside, revealing a path that led further into the heart of the city, past glowing gardens and shimmering waterways. "Then walk forward. Here, you can begin again." Lyra and Avon took a step forward, their hands once again entwined. The city, alive with the hum of possibility, welcomed them into its heart. And in that moment, they realized that the journey they had started was not one of escape, but one of creation. The future, like the city, was alive. And it was theirs to shape. Act 12, The Architects of Tomorrow. Lyra and Avon stood at the edge of the city's heart, feeling the pulse of it beneath their feet. The city of Evermore wasn't just alive, it was waiting, a place where everything they had ever learned had brought them to this singular moment. The path ahead was no longer a journey through the unknown, it was a canvas untouched, waiting for them to paint it with their own desires, with the truths they had uncovered. The keeper's words still echoed in their minds. Now, you must choose. Will you stay and create something new, or return to the world you came from, armed with the knowledge you have gained? In the distance, beyond the glimmering streets and flowing rivers, lay a vast expanse. At first glance, it seemed like a landscape: green fields and rolling hills, dotted with clusters of trees. But as they looked closer, they saw that it was far more than that. The land was shaped, sculpted, as though someone had started with nothing and built something from the ground up. "This is it," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with awe. "This is what we're meant to do." Avon nodded, his gaze focused on the distant horizon. "Create. Build. Shape something new from everything we've learned." They began walking toward the open expanse, each step heavier with the weight of the choice they had made. The land before them seemed to bend and shift with their movements, as if it were alive with anticipation. As they walked, the landscape around them began to change. The green fields they had seen earlier transformed into rolling hills that slowly rose into towering mountains, their peaks hidden in mist. The mountains were no longer made of stone, but of something far more organic, alive, pulsing with energy. The air shimmered with the power of creation itself, and Lyra and Avon could feel it in their bones. "I can feel it," Lyra said, her hand outstretched, her fingers brushing the air. "It's like the world is alive with possibility. Every step we take, it's changing." Avon smiled, the weight of everything they had been through beginning to fall away. "I think that's the point. This place, it responds to us, to what we choose to bring into it." They reached the base of the mountains, where the landscape stretched out before them, limitless. The ground beneath them was still soft, but it had a strange texture: smooth, almost like fabric, yet firm and unyielding. Lyra knelt down and touched it, her fingers sinking slightly into the surface, but not enough to leave a mark. "What is this?" she asked, looking up at Avon. "It's us," Avon said, his voice soft, almost reverent. "It's the potential we carry. The land here. It's not made of what's already been. It's made of what we bring." As if on cue, the land before them began to shift once more, this time forming into structures: tall towers, wide bridges, winding roads, all made of the same material, soft and flexible, yet strong. The shapes seemed to grow out of the ground, rising to meet the sky, forming a city that was uniquely their own. Avon stepped forward, his hand reaching out to touch one of the towers. It was smooth beneath his fingers, like water, yet it stood firm, unyielding. "It's not just about the choices we made," he said, his voice filled with a quiet understanding. "It's about what we create now." Lyra nodded, her eyes focused on the city taking shape before them. "And what we choose to become." Together, they continued to walk, moving deeper into the city, watching as the structures rose and fell with each of their movements. The world was not static, it was fluid, shifting, evolving. It was a world of their own making. The towers became homes, and the homes became communities. The paths they had walked along transformed into roads that branched out in every direction. It wasn't just a city, it was a living, breathing testament to their choices, their understanding, their growth. And as the city took form, so did their vision for it. It wasn't just about building. It was about creating something that could endure, something that could adapt, something that could be shared. We've learned, Lyra said, her voice filled with certainty. This is where we bring it all together. Not just for us, but for everyone. Avon smiled, his heart light with the knowledge that this was the path they had always been meant to walk. Yes. A place where everything we've learned can grow. Together. The city of Evermore was no longer just a place of possibilities, it was a testament to the choices they had made, the truths they had embraced. And with each choice they made now, with each step forward, the city grew stronger, more alive. The people who had once passed through the city of Evermore, those who had learned the same lessons, began to return slowly at first, like whispers on the wind. But soon, the streets were alive with movement, with purpose. The city was no longer just a creation of Lyra and Avon, it was a creation of everyone who had ever passed through it, everyone who had come to understand the importance of choice, the power of creation. Together, they would build a world not defined by the past, but shaped by the future. And as they walked hand in hand through the streets of Evermore, Lyra and Avon knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Act 13, The Architects of the Infinite. The city of Evermore, once an idea born from Lyra and Avon's shared understanding, had now blossomed into something vibrant, something alive. Its streets were no longer empty. The homes they built, the bridges they created, the pathways that stretched into the horizon, they were all alive with stories, memories, and the potential of countless lives yet to be lived. But despite its beauty, despite the wonder of it all, there remained a quiet question that lingered in the back of their minds. What was the true purpose of Evermore? It wasn't enough to simply exist. To simply be. It wasn't enough to create things that existed for the sake of creation. They needed more than that. They needed meaning, something that would sustain the city, this place, beyond their own hands. Lyra stood on a balcony, looking out over the city below. The sky had shifted again, the stars sparkling like distant promises. The air was thick with the hum of life, every person, every creature, every plant, every building a part of the larger whole. But something tugged at her heart. Something more was needed. Avon joined her, his presence a quiet comfort. He stood beside her, silent at first, his gaze following hers. "I think it's time," he said softly. Lyra turned to him. "Time for what?" "To open the heart of the city," Avon said, his voice filled with conviction. "To share it with others. To make this a place not just for us, but for everyone." Lyra's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. "I've been thinking the same thing. We've built a home here, yes. But it's still a home for only a few. We need to expand. To open the gates. To make the city a living, breathing thing that grows with the world around it. Avon nodded. The city has always been more than just us. It's been waiting for others to help shape it, to build upon it. We've laid the foundation, but now we need to allow others to step in and build with us. Together, they made their way down the winding streets toward the center of Evermore. The heart of the city, where the grandest structures stood, where the rivers of light flowed into the open plaza. As they walked, the city seemed to respond, shifting around them, welcoming their every step. The towers and the homes seemed to pulse in rhythm with their movements, as though the city were alive, aware of their intentions. They reached the plaza, and in the center stood a towering structure, unlike any other. It wasn't made of stone or wood, but of light. A column of radiant energy that stretched toward the sky, reaching toward the stars above. It was the heart of the city, and it had been waiting for them to unlock its true potential. "This is it," Lyra said, her voice filled with awe. "This is the core of Evermore." Avon looked at her, his expression full of wonder. "It's more than just the core. It's the heart of all creation here. The energy that fuels everything. But it's incomplete without others. Without those who will carry the spirit of this place forward." Lyra closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Then let's open it." Together, they reached out and placed their hands on the glowing column. The light responded, swirling around their fingers, spiraling up their arms and into their hearts. It was a force unlike any they had ever felt, a power that connected them to the city, to the world, to the very fabric of existence itself. As they stood there, the column of light began to pulse, expanding outward, radiating a warm glow that spread across the city. The air hummed with energy, the streets growing brighter, the buildings more alive. The ground beneath them seemed to vibrate with a new energy, as though the city was waking up to its full potential. "We've done it," Avon whispered. Lyra smiled, her heart swelling with pride and anticipation. "We've opened the gates. The city is ready." And just as the light expanded, it began to call out, first in whispers, then in voices, distant but growing closer. The city was alive, but now it was waiting for others to join it, to help shape it, to add their own pieces to the puzzle that Lyra and Avon had started. The city of Evermore wasn't just a place anymore. It was a beacon. A living thing, full of possibilities, and now, it was ready to be filled with the energy of those who would come. But as the city's light began to spread, something new happened. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Not with the excitement of new life, but with the tension of something that had been waiting in the shadows. Lyra and Avon paused, looking at each other, sensing the shift. The light continued to pulse, but now it was different. The hum of the city was no longer a peaceful rhythm. It was something darker, something older, a force that had been buried beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to awaken. Avon looked at Lyra, his brow furrowed. "What is that?" "I don't know," she said, her voice steady but filled with unease. "But I think it's a part of this place that we haven't unlocked yet." Before they could react, the ground split open with a violent crack, and from beneath the earth, something began to rise. At first, it was a shadow, a shape, but then it solidified, becoming a creature of pure energy, a being made of light and dark, its form shifting and writhing like a serpent. It was unlike anything they had ever seen, both beautiful and terrifying. Lyra stepped back, her hand instinctively reaching for Avon's. "What is it?" The creature spoke, its voice not in words, but in a deep, resonating hum that vibrated in their bones. "I am the guardian of Evermore," it said, its voice carrying the weight of eons. "I have watched this city grow, and I have waited for those who would open the gates. But now, you must understand the price." "The price?" Avon asked, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "The price of creation," the Guardian continued. "For every new beginning, there must be an end. For every path forward, there must be one left behind. The city is yours to build, but it is not without consequence." Lyra and Avon exchanged a glance, realizing that the world they had opened had a cost. This was not just a place of creation, it was a place of balance. And the balance would not be maintained without sacrifice. "Then what must we do?" Lyra asked, her voice calm but filled with resolve. The Guardian's form flickered. "You must choose. To build is to create. To create is to destroy. The choice is yours." The world around them began to shift again, the light fading into shadow as the weight of the Guardian's words settled around them. Lyra and Avon stood there, side by side, feeling the weight of the choice ahead of them. Act 14, The Cost of Creation. The air around Lyra and Avon had thickened with the weight of the Guardian's words. The creature of light and shadow, once a whisper, now a roar, loomed before them, its presence overwhelming, yet strangely familiar. It was not an enemy, not a force to be fought, but a reminder of the delicate balance that shaped everything, everywhere. Lyra stood frozen, her heart racing as she absorbed the gravity of the decision in front of them. Avon's hand tightened around hers, his pulse steady but his thoughts in turmoil. The Guardian's words echoed in their minds like the toll of a bell, each resonation carrying a new layer of understanding. "You must choose," the Guardian repeated, its voice not one of judgment, but of inevitability. To create is to destroy. To build is to unbuild. The very fabric of Evermore relies on this balance. And the price will be paid. Avon, ever the thinker, was the first to break the silence. His gaze was intense, fixed on the Guardian as if trying to pierce through the ethereal figure to uncover its deeper meaning. "What do you mean? What is the cost we must pay?" The Guardian's form shimmered, its edges blurring like smoke in the wind. "The act of creation is a force that disrupts. It moves things, shifts them, and sometimes tears them apart. To build, something must be undone. To move forward, something must be left behind. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. But we've already left behind so much. We've already given up everything we thought we knew. Why would we have to pay more? Because, the Guardian intoned, the true cost of creation is not the things we lose, but the parts of ourselves we leave behind without ever realizing they were there. Lyra turned to Avon, her heart heavy with the weight of the unknown. What if? What if we can't bear the price? What if we lose too much? Avon stepped forward, his voice low but firm. We can't turn back now. We've already opened the gates. We've already stepped through the veil. We can't undo what we've done. We have to face what comes next. The Guardian's form flickered with something like a smile, though its face was still a swirling mass of light and shadow. You are correct. And yet, there is one more thing you must know. The price is not always what you expect. Sometimes, the cost comes in a form you cannot anticipate. With that, the Guardian raised its hand, and the world around them seemed to change again. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and the air shimmered with a strange energy. The city, Evermore, that they had created began to pull at them. The structures they had built, the roads they had laid, the homes they had shaped, all of it began to warp, the boundaries between what was created and what was yet to come blending into one another. The city seemed to breathe, growing faster, more expansive, but something darker was stirring within it. What's happening? Lyra gasped, her voice barely audible over the rumble of the earth beneath them. The city is alive, the Guardian said softly. It feeds on the energy you give it. But it also takes. And now, as it grows, it will demand more. More from you, more from everything. Avon's heart skipped a beat. It's taking us. The Guardian nodded, its form shifting again. Yes. But it is not a punishment. It is a natural consequence of creation. Everything that grows must consume something. The city is now a living being, and you are its creators. But to sustain it, to let it reach its full potential, you must sacrifice what you hold dear. The air around them grew thick with the weight of those words, and Lyra felt something inside her stir an unease, a fear that had always been buried beneath the surface. They had built this city together, yes. They had created it from their hopes, their dreams, and their love. But now, the very thing they had brought into being was pulling at them, demanding something they were not ready to give. Avon took a step back, his mind racing. What exactly are we supposed to give? What are we supposed to lose to keep this place alive? The Guardian's eyes gleamed with a strange, knowing light. You must choose what you are willing to give up to preserve the balance. For every choice made, something must be let go. You created Evermore, but in doing so, you disrupted the natural order. To keep the city alive, to keep it growing, you must sacrifice a part of yourself. And that sacrifice will be a test of your very being. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it all. She had known that creation came with consequences. She had known that building something meant leaving something behind. But the truth of it, this truth was more than she had ever anticipated. It wasn't just about giving up things. It was about giving up herself. Is it worth it? She asked, her voice trembling. Is the city worth our sacrifice? The Guardian's form flickered again, and the weight of its presence seemed to grow heavier, darker. Only you can answer that. The world around them seemed to darken in response. The city, once filled with light and life, began to change again. Its streets twisted, its buildings warped, as if the very fabric of Evermore was beginning to fray at the edges. The very act of creation, of allowing the city to grow, was starting to tear at its foundations. Lyra and Avon stood at the crossroads once more. The path ahead was no longer clear. The question was no longer whether they could build something beautiful, it was whether they could sacrifice what was necessary to ensure that it lasted. I don't want to lose everything, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. Avon looked at her, his gaze filled with the same uncertainty, the same fear. But there was something else there too. A determination, a resolve. We won't lose everything, he said softly. We'll give what we must, but we won't lose ourselves. And with that, they turned back toward the city, the light flickering in the distance, the pulse of life growing stronger with each step. Together, they walked forward into the unknown, knowing that the price of creation would be steep, but determined to face it head on. Act 15, The Choice of Evermore. Lyra and Avon stood at the precipice, the city of Evermore pulsing before them like a living, breathing entity. The air around them hummed with energy, thick with the weight of the choice that lay ahead. The Guardian's words echoed in their minds, for every choice made, something must be let go. And that sacrifice will be a test of your very being. The city, their creation, was alive, but it was not thriving. It was pulling, stretching, expanding in ways they hadn't anticipated. The foundations they had built were shifting under the pressure of growth, and the world they had formed was beginning to fray. They had opened the gates, invited others to join them, and now they were faced with the true cost of creation, the delicate balance between growth and decay. What do we do? Lyra asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the decision. She felt the pull of the city, like a tugging at the center of her chest, urging her forward, urging her to make a choice. The city was waiting for them to decide, and it was clear that the consequences of their actions would ripple out into the world, affecting more than just them. Avon's eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the glowing cityscape stretched out, its light flickering and shifting, as if alive with anticipation. We've come so far, he said softly, more to himself than to Lyra. We've created something beautiful, something full of potential. But is it worth the price? The city around them seemed to respond to the question. The ground beneath their feet shifted again, and the hum of the energy in the air grew louder, as if the city itself was speaking, urging them to make a decision. The weight of creation pressed down on them, demanding that they give up something to preserve the balance. Lyra closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The air was thick with possibility, but it was also heavy with the cost. What will we sacrifice? We have to choose, she said, her voice steadier now. We've built something, but now we need to decide what we're willing to give up to let it grow. Avon turned to face her, his expression filled with the same understanding. He reached out, taking her hand, and for a moment, they stood together, drawing strength from each other. They had walked this path together, and they would continue to walk it no matter what lay ahead. I think, Avon said, his voice firm, we have to give up what we thought we couldn't live without. Lyra nodded slowly. The city is growing, but it's pulling us in too. If we don't make a sacrifice, it will collapse. We have to choose what we're willing to lose to ensure its survival. They both turned back toward the heart of Evermore, the radiant column of light still pulsing in the distance. It was the core of everything they had created, the symbol of their efforts, their dreams, and their love. But now, it was more than that. It was a reminder that creation was not just about bringing something into existence. It was about knowing what it would cost. The Guardian's voice echoed through the air, clear and unyielding. To build is to destroy. To create is to unmake. The balance must be kept. Lyra felt her heart pound in her chest. She knew that the sacrifice was not just about giving up the physical things they had built, it was about giving up something far deeper, something that they might not fully understand until they made the choice. I'm ready, she said softly, her voice filled with quiet resolve. I'm ready to let go of whatever it takes to ensure Evermore lives. Avon looked at her, his eyes searching hers for a moment. Are you sure? Lyra nodded. Yes. We've built this place together, and we've given so much already. But now, we have to let go of the parts of ourselves that are holding us back. We can't be afraid of what we must lose. Avon squeezed her hand. Then let's make it count. Together, they stepped forward toward the heart of Evermore, toward the glowing column of light. As they approached, the energy around them intensified, the air crackling with the force of creation and destruction. The city was waiting. The world was waiting. The column of light began to shimmer and ripple, its form shifting as if it were alive. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, and the city seemed to lean in, pulling them closer, demanding their decision. Do you understand now? The Guardian's voice asked, the words heavy with meaning. The price is not just about what you sacrifice, it's about what you make of it. Will you carry the weight of creation, knowing that it comes with a cost? Will you shape the future of Evermore, even if it means leaving behind parts of yourself? Lyra and Avon stood before the column, the energy swirling around them like a storm. They felt the pull, the pressure, and the weight of the choice. But they knew, deep down, that there was no going back. They had already crossed the threshold. They had already chosen. Together, they stepped forward, placing their hands on the column. The moment their palms touched the light, the city around them erupted in a burst of energy. The ground trembled, and the air crackled with the force of the transformation. The column of light exploded outward, sending waves of energy through the city, into the sky, and beyond. The city grew, expanding rapidly, its structures shifting and evolving as the energy of creation flowed through it. The streets stretched out, the buildings growing taller, the rivers of light flowing faster. It was a place of infinite potential, but now, it was a place of shared creation, a place where the people of Evermore would come together to shape their future. As the energy settled, Lyra and Avon stood together, their hearts pounding, their hands still linked. The sacrifice had been made. They had given up something they hadn't fully understood, but now, they saw the city for what it truly was. It wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, shaped by their choices, their love, and their understanding. And as they looked out over the city, the vast expanse of Evermore stretching out before them, they realized that the true power of creation lay not in what they had built, but in what they had learned, the balance between creation and destruction, between sacrifice and reward, between holding on and letting go. Together, they had shaped a future. Together, they had built Evermore. And together, they would continue to build, one choice at a time. Act 16, The Seeds of Evermore. The dawn broke over Evermore, casting a soft golden light over the city that had grown from the hands of Lyra and Avon. The city had become a living, breathing entity, a place not just built but shaped by every choice they made, by every step they took. It was not just a city, it was a reflection of everything they had been and everything they would become. But as the light of the new day filtered through the vast skyline, the pulse of the city carried with it something more than just the energy of life. There was a quiet hum beneath the surface, something that felt like the city was still growing, still evolving, but at a pace that wasn't entirely in their control. The power they had unleashed, the creation they had sparked, was no longer solely theirs to command. It was the beginning of something new, yes, but also the beginning of an understanding that they were not its sole architects. It was becoming clear that Evermore was no longer just a reflection of their vision. It was its own entity, one that now stood with them, not beneath them. Lyra stood on the balcony of the highest tower, her eyes tracing the horizon. The city sprawled below her, vibrant and alive. The streets were bustling with people, creatures, and spirits that seemed to have found a place in the ever-changing expanse. Everywhere she looked, something was happening, a building rising, a garden blooming, a new path forming. It was beautiful, chaotic, and infinite. But there was something in the air, something heavier than the promise of new beginnings. It was a sense of imbalance, of something still unsettled. Avon joined her, his footsteps quiet on the stone floor. "What's on your mind?" She turned to face him, her brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know." The city. It's growing faster than we expected. I thought we understood what it would need, what it would become. But now, I'm starting to feel like we've unleashed something we can't fully control. Avon's eyes darkened as he looked toward the heart of the city, where the column of light still pulsed with energy. It had been the source of creation, of growth. And yet, it had also been a symbol of something more, something they hadn't fully grasped when they had unlocked its power. "You're right," Avon said softly. "It's as if we've tapped into something deeper. The city, the world, it's alive now, and it's no longer just a reflection of us. It's becoming its own entity." Lyra nodded, her fingers brushing the railing in front of her. "But what if it needs more than we can give? What if it's too much? Too fast?" Avon stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We can't stop it now. But we can guide it. We've always known that creation wasn't just about shaping something from nothing. It's about understanding the forces behind it, the things we can't see or control. But maybe this is part of the process. Maybe Evermore is showing us something we didn't understand at first." Lyra turned back to the horizon, her gaze fixed on the glowing spires in the distance. "And what if it's too late?" "There's no such thing as too late," Avon said with conviction. "We've built something, yes. But now we have to nurture it. We've always been meant to be more than just creators. We're its keepers, its guardians. Evermore doesn't just need us to build it, it needs us to protect it, to guide it." Lyra turned to him, her face softening. "You're right. We've given it life, but now we have to give it purpose. We've been so focused on what we can create, on how we can shape it, that we forgot about what it needs to thrive." Avon smiled, his hand still resting on her shoulder. "Then let's give it that purpose. Together." They stood in silence for a long moment, the city humming beneath them, alive with the promise of the future. It was a future they had not only built but now had to protect, a future they had to share with others. It was no longer just about Lyra and Avon. It was about everyone who would come to Evermore, about everyone who would contribute to its growth. But as the silence stretched on, a faint tremor rippled through the city, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to shift. It wasn't violent, but it was enough to send a wave of unease through them both. Avon looked at Lyra, his expression serious. "What was that?" Before she could respond, the guardian appeared before them. This time, it was not a dark figure of light and shadow but a presence, a being of pure energy that seemed to pulse with the very life of the city. Its form flickered like a flame, shifting constantly, never settling in one shape for long. "You have begun the work," the guardian said, its voice both echoing and intimate. "But it is not over. You have unlocked Evermore's heart, and now, you must face the true cost of creation." Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. We've already made the sacrifice. We've given everything. No, the guardian replied, its form shimmering. The sacrifice is not complete. You have given life to Evermore, but you have not yet given it the direction it needs. The city is growing faster than you can understand, and soon, it will surpass your control. You must guide it before it becomes something you cannot stop. Lyra and Avon exchanged a glance, the weight of the guardian's words settling over them. The city was growing, changing, becoming something more than they had anticipated. And with that growth came the responsibility of maintaining balance. What do we need to do? Avon asked, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. The guardian's form flickered, and for a moment, it seemed to dissolve into the air. The city has a pulse, it said. A heartbeat. You have given it life, but you must now give it the foundation to grow. A foundation that is not based on your will alone, but on the collective strength of those who will come to shape it. You cannot do this alone. You must find the ones who will stand with you. Only together can you guide Evermore toward its true purpose. The guardian's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Lyra and Avon stood in silence, feeling the weight of the responsibility they now bore. The city was no longer just theirs. It was a living, breathing entity, and it needed more than just the two of them to survive. It needed the hearts, minds, and hands of everyone who came to it. What do we do next? Lyra asked, her voice barely a whisper. The guardian's presence flickered one last time, and then it was gone. In its place, a simple phrase echoed in the air. Find those who will walk with you. Act 17, The Guardians of Evermore. The sun had set over Evermore, casting long shadows across the now sprawling city. The pulse of the city, its heartbeat, its very essence was becoming more pronounced with each passing day. It was alive, but it was also restless, growing at a pace that neither Lyra nor Avon had fully anticipated. They had given the city life, but now they had to give it direction, purpose, and balance. As they walked through the streets, the weight of the guardian's words hung over them like a storm cloud. Find those who will walk with you. It was a simple phrase, but it was more than just an instruction, it was a plea. The city was growing, and it needed more than just the two of them to guide it. They had created something beautiful, something full of potential, but they could not carry the burden alone. They needed allies. They needed others who could help them shape Evermore into something that would endure. The streets were quiet, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. The city was waiting, and Lyra and Avon both knew that they had to find the right people, the right hearts, to help them guide it. They couldn't do this by themselves. I feel it, Avon, Lyra said quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the city. I feel the weight of it all, the growth, the change, the responsibility. It's too much for just us. Avon's gaze was steady, his face calm but filled with determination. I know. We can't carry this alone. The city is too big. too full of potential to leave it all in our hands. We have to find others. We have to find those who believe in what we've started. They stopped at the edge of the main square, the heart of the city. The plaza stretched out before them, its grand fountain bubbling with light, its pathways winding in every direction. The city was alive, its buildings shimmered in the moonlight, its streets pulsed with energy, but there was something else beneath the surface. A restlessness. A hunger for something more. The city was waiting, but for what? For who? Lyra closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the energy of the city fill her senses. She could feel it, the heartbeat of the place, the pulse of the land, the hum of creation itself. But there was something else, a void. A space that needed to be filled. A space that could only be filled by those who would walk with them, side by side, to shape Evermore into what it was meant to be. It's time, Avon said, his voice firm. We need to seek out those who can help us. Those who can guide the city, shape it, nurture it. And we need to find them now. Lyra nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. They had come so far, built so much, but the road ahead was still long. The city was not just a creation, it was a responsibility. And it was a responsibility that would require them to find others who shared their vision, their passion, their understanding of what Evermore could become. They began walking, the energy of the city swirling around them as they moved. Every step they took felt like a step deeper into the heart of the world they had created, a world that was still growing, still becoming. As they walked, they passed the homes they had built, the gardens they had planted, the bridges they had constructed. But now, they began to see the faces of the people who had arrived. They had come to Evermore, seeking something that Lyra and Avon had no words for yet. They had come, perhaps, because they too felt the pull of creation, the hunger for something more than what they had left behind. There were people working the fields, tending to the crops that had begun to grow in the fertile land. There were children playing in the streets, laughing and shouting as they raced down the cobbled pathways. There were artists painting murals on the walls, creating images of hope and beauty that seemed to come to life with every brush stroke. There were musicians playing songs that filled the air with the sound of joy, the sound of life. And there were the elders, those who had come to offer their wisdom, their knowledge. They sat in the open air, speaking softly to one another, their faces lined with the years of experience, but their eyes shining with the same light that filled the city itself. This was Evermore. This was the world they had created. But now, they needed more. Where do we start? Lyra asked, her voice soft as she surveyed the scene around her. How do we find the ones who will help us guide this place? Avon glanced around, his gaze thoughtful. I think the city will tell us. We just have to listen. They walked deeper into the city, letting the energy of it guide them. As they moved, they began to notice the people who seemed to be drawn to them, who seemed to feel the same pull that had led Lyra and Avon here in the first place. There was a woman standing near the fountain, her hands raised to the sky as she spoke softly to the air. Her eyes were closed, and her face was serene, as though she was communicating with something beyond the physical world. Lyra felt a strange sense of recognition wash over her. This woman was a creator, someone who could see beyond the surface, someone who could tap into the energy of Evermore in ways they couldn't. They approached her, and she turned as if sensing their presence. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I knew you would come." Lyra and Avon exchanged a glance. "You knew?" Avon asked, his voice laced with curiosity. The woman nodded. "I could feel the pulse of the city. I could feel its heartbeat, its calling. And I knew that you two were the ones who would bring it to life. But it isn't just about creation. It's about what happens next. What comes after." Lyra stepped closer. "What do you mean?" The woman smiled, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "The city needs more than just builders. It needs visionaries. It needs those who can see the future, not just the present. It needs those who can guide it toward its true purpose." Avon's heart raced as he felt the weight of her words. This was it. This was the moment they had been waiting for. "Will you help us?" Lyra asked, her voice steady but filled with hope. The woman nodded again. "I will help you. But you will need more than just me. You will need others, those who can see what is not yet visible, who can hear the whispers of the future. And they will come. Just like I did." The woman reached out and placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. "Evermore will grow, but it cannot grow alone. It needs those who are willing to shape it, to nurture it, to lead it forward. And together, we will guide it into the future." Lyra and Avon stood in silence, the weight of the woman's words settling over them like a blanket. They had made the choice to create, to build. But now, they had to make the choice to guide, to lead, and to nurture what they had brought into being. And the city, Evermore, had already begun to answer. Act 18, The Assembly of Evermore. The dawn broke slowly over the city, casting a soft glow across the streets of Evermore. The city had continued to grow, expanding at a pace that Lyra and Avon could no longer control. It was a place of infinite potential, but also of great risk. The city was alive, yes, but it was also unpredictable. The energy they had awakened had a mind of its own, and the growth was both exhilarating and terrifying. Together, they had built this world, and now, they were beginning to see the true weight of their creation. Evermore wasn't just a place for them, it was a place for everyone who came to it, who would shape it, who would contribute to its ongoing evolution. They needed others who understood the balance of creation and destruction, who would help guide the city and its inhabitants toward the future they all dreamed of. But finding those people, those visionaries, would not be easy. Lyra and Avon had begun their search, but now, as the city expanded and the energy of Evermore pulsed more fiercely, they knew that they would need to work together, not just with each other, but with Others who could bring their own wisdom, their own gifts, to the table. Lyra stood on the balcony once more, watching as the city pulsed with life below her. The streets were alive with movement, with purpose. People were working, creating, living. But there was something beneath it all, a feeling of restlessness, of uncertainty. The city was growing faster than they had anticipated, and with that growth came the need for direction. Avon joined her, his footsteps soft on the stone. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice low, but steady. Lyra turned to him, her face thoughtful. "I think we're at a crossroads. We've created something beautiful, something full of potential. But now, we have to make sure it doesn't consume us. We need to find those who will help us guide this place. We need the architects of the future." Avon nodded. "I agree. We've already seen the first of them. The woman by the fountain, she was the first of many. But there are others out there, people who will help us shape the city, give it the guidance it needs. People who will help us lead, not just build." Lyra smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle over her. The city needs more than just creation. It needs vision, it needs wisdom. It needs balance. Together, they walked through the streets, their minds set on their mission. They had already begun their search for the ones who would join them, but now, the urgency was greater than ever. The city was alive, but it was restless, and its pulse was growing stronger by the day. They couldn't wait any longer. They needed to find those who would walk with them, who would help them guide Evermore into its true potential. They made their way through the heart of the city, where the fountains flowed with liquid light, and the air was thick with the hum of energy. As they moved, they saw others, artists, musicians, builders, and dreamers, all contributing to the growth of Evermore in their own ways. But none of them seemed to have the same pull as the woman they had met by the fountain. Then, as they turned a corner, they saw her again. The woman stood in front of a grand structure, her arms outstretched to the sky. Her eyes were closed, but her expression was calm, serene. She seemed to be communicating with the city itself, listening to the whispers of Evermore. Lyra and Avon approached her once more, and this time, she turned to face them, as though she had been expecting them. There was a knowing look in her eyes, a sense that she understood more than she was letting on. "I knew you would come," she said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. Avon stepped forward. "We need your help," he said, his voice steady. "We've built this city, but now we need to guide it, to shape it. We can't do this alone." The woman smiled, a gentle, understanding smile. "You've already built it, haven't you? But now comes the hard part. Now comes the true test of creation." Lyra's heart raced. "What do you mean?" The woman's eyes softened. "Creation is easy. It's the beginning that's always the most exhilarating. But to sustain it, to give it purpose, that's where the real work lies. The city is alive now. But it's still a baby. It needs guidance, it needs wisdom, it needs balance. Avon finished for her, his voice filled with understanding. The woman nodded. Exactly. And that balance is something you can't do alone. You need others who understand that. Lyra's gaze shifted to the horizon, to the glowing city, the streets filled with life. She knew the woman was right. The city had grown from their hands, but now it needed more. It needed others, those who could help them shape the future, those who could bring their own vision, their own wisdom, to the table. Where do we find them? Lyra asked, her voice quiet but filled with determination. The woman stepped closer, her gaze steady. They are already here, in Evermore. You must listen. The city will guide you. It will show you the ones who can help. Lyra and Avon stood in silence, taking in the weight of her words. The city was more than just buildings and streets. It was a living, breathing entity, and it would grow, evolve, and shape itself just as they had. But it was no longer just their creation. It was something more. And now, it was time to find the ones who would walk with them, to find those who would help guide it forward. As the days passed, Lyra and Avon continued their search through the city, guided by the whispers of the land itself. The city was alive, more so than ever before. It pulsed with energy, with life, with the endless potential of creation. But it was still restless, still uncertain of its path. And Lyra and Avon knew that they could not allow it to grow unchecked. They found others, artists who painted visions of the future, musicians whose songs seemed to shape the air, builders who could manipulate the very ground beneath them, creating structures that seemed to defy the laws of nature. Each person they found brought something unique to the city, something that completed the puzzle, something that made Evermore more than just a place, it made it a home. And with each new addition, the city seemed to settle, to find its rhythm. It was still growing, still changing, but it was no longer chaotic. It was alive, but now it had purpose. And Lyra and Avon knew that they had done more than just create. It was now time to protect and guide. Act 19, The Gathering of Voices. Evermore had become more than just a city. It was a living, breathing testament to the vision that Lyra and Avon had set in motion. It was growing, evolving, expanding, but with each passing day, it became clearer that the journey they had started was only just beginning. The city pulsed with energy, but it was no longer chaotic. It was balanced, shaped by the new voices they had gathered, the dreamers, the builders, the visionaries, and the keepers of knowledge. Together, they had begun to forge a new future. Together, they had brought Evermore to life. But now, Lyra and Avon understood that the work had only just started. They had planted the seeds, but it was time for Evermore to blossom into something more profound, something that would last for generations. And to do that, they needed more. The streets of Evermore were filled with activity as they walked through the heart of the city, their feet moving across the familiar cobblestones. The energy was different now. There was a harmony to it, a sense of direction. They had gathered the first wave of voices, the first group of architects, the first leaders who would help guide the city into its true potential. But there were still more. The city was vast, and it needed the wisdom of every corner, every path. Lyra turned to Avon, her voice soft but determined. "We've found the first ones. But there's more out there. There's still so much to do." Avon looked ahead, his expression thoughtful. "I know. The city has grown quickly. But it's not enough to just let it happen. We have to direct it, to steer it. We need those who will help us guide this place, help us protect what we've built." They paused at the edge of the Grand Plaza, the heart of Evermore, where the fountain of liquid light continued to flow with steady rhythm. People moved around them: artists, builders, musicians, farmers, and scholars. Each person seemed to have found their place in the city, contributing to its expansion. But still, there was a sense that they were at the cusp of something even greater. "Where do we start?" Lyra asked, scanning the crowd before them. The faces that passed by were filled with hope and determination. But there was also a sense of waiting for the next step, the next push forward. Avon's gaze shifted, following her line of sight. "I think it's time we open the gates again," he said softly. "There's more to this place than we know. More to discover. We need to bring in more people, more voices." Lyra's heart quickened at the thought. The gates of Evermore had once been closed, but now they had opened them to allow the first few souls who would help shape the city. But there was something stirring within her, something she couldn't ignore. She could feel it, deep in her bones. Evermore was calling for something else, something beyond their comprehension. "Do you hear it?" Lyra asked suddenly, her voice hushed, as though afraid to disturb the energy in the air. "It's like the city is speaking to us." Avon paused, listening. The wind swirled around them, carrying the distant hum of music, the sound of laughter, and the low murmur of voices. But there was something more to it, a deeper resonance that echoed beneath the surface of the everyday sounds. "I hear it," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "The city is alive. And it's calling us to listen." Lyra closed her eyes, focusing on the hum that seemed to reverberate from the very earth beneath them. It was a gentle vibration, a pulse that felt like it was moving through her, guiding her thoughts, whispering its needs. "It's telling us something," she murmured. "Evermore wants to grow. It needs more voices, more hands, more hearts." Avon nodded slowly. "And we need to find them. We've opened the gates before, but this time, we need to invite them in. The city won't just grow on its own. It needs us to actively seek out those who will help guide it." With that thought in mind, Lyra and Avon set out once more, walking deeper into the heart of the city, determined to find the next wave of voices who would shape the future of Evermore. As they walked through the bustling streets, the sights and sounds of Evermore surrounded them, people working together, creating, learning, building. It was a symphony of activity, a mixture of life and growth. Yet, despite the vibrancy of the city, there was an unmistakable sense that they were still in the early stages of something far greater. The sky above was a canvas of shifting colors, the stars beginning to appear as dusk settled over the city. The air was filled with the sounds of the city coming to life, the chatter of people, the clinking of tools, the rustling of leaves from the trees that lined the streets. They reached the edge of the city, where the forest met the farthest outskirts of Evermore. Here, the land was less developed, more wild, but there was something ancient in the air. It was as though the land itself had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the city to expand outward, beyond its boundaries. Lyra paused at the edge of the forest, her hand resting on a tree that stood like a silent sentinel. She could feel it, the pull of the city, reaching out, yearning for more. "We've come so far," she said softly. "But it's not enough. Evermore needs to be more than just a place. It needs to be a community." Avon stepped beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's not just about the buildings or the streets. It's about the people. It's about creating a place where people can come together and shape the future, not just individually, but collectively. Evermore has to be a place where everyone's voice matters." Lyra nodded, the weight of their responsibility settling over her like a cloak. They had built a city, yes, but now they had to build a community. They had to open the gates once more, not just to new people, but to new ideas, new voices, new perspectives. Evermore had the potential to be a place where anyone could belong, where anyone could contribute, where the future was not decided by one, but by all. And so, they began to call out, their voices carrying across the city, reaching beyond the walls to the farthest corners of the land. They called for those who would help guide the city, those who would walk with them, shaping Evermore into a place of unity, strength, and hope. One by one, the people began to arrive. Some came from distant lands, drawn by the promise of a new beginning. Others were from the heart of Evermore, people who had already contributed to the city's growth, but who knew that it was time for something greater. Together, they stood at the heart of Evermore, the city growing around them, its pulse steady and strong. And as the last of the new voices arrived, Lyra and Avon knew that they had found the future they had been waiting for. Evermore was no longer just their creation. It was a place for everyone, a place where all could contribute, where all could belong. And with that, the true work of creation began. Final act, the legacy of Evermore. The night had fallen over Evermore, but the city glowed with a warmth that seemed to emanate from within. The stars above twinkled brightly, as though they, too, were drawn to the city's pulsing energy. The air was thick with possibility, alive with the hum of a future unfolding. Lyra and Avon stood together at the edge of the Grand Plaza, the heart of Evermore. The streets below were bustling with life, the glow of lanterns casting long shadows, illuminating the pathways that stretched far into the distance. The city had become more than they had ever imagined, a place of boundless potential, where the energy of creation flowed freely, shaping everything it touched. But as they gazed out over the city, they could feel the weight of the responsibility they had carried, the responsibility to guide, to nurture, and to protect. They had created something beautiful, something full of hope, but they knew that their journey wasn't over. The future of Evermore was not a singular vision, it was a collective effort, a creation forged by the people who had come together to build it. "This is it, isn't it?" Lyra said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "We've come so far." Avon stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the city below. He could see it, the sprawling streets, the homes they had built, the gardens, the markets. It was more than just a city, it was a reflection of everything they had learned, everything they had fought for. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady but filled with a quiet awe. "But it's not just ours anymore. It never was. This is the legacy of everyone who's come together, everyone who believes in what we've built." Lyra smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the horizon. "I think I finally understand. It was never about just creating a city. It was about creating a place where people could belong. A place where every voice has a part in shaping the future." Avon nodded. "Evermore is not just a city. It's a community. It's a living thing, and it needs to be cared for, nurtured, and protected. But now, we've built something strong, something that will stand the test of time." As they stood there, their thoughts turned to the future. What would come next? What challenges lay ahead? But despite the uncertainty that always accompanies change, they knew one thing with certainty: Evermore had already begun to grow beyond them. It was no longer just their dream, their creation. It was everyone's. "I think we've done what we set out to do," Lyra said, her voice tinged with both exhaustion and fulfillment. "But it's not over. This is just the beginning." Avon smiled, his hand gently brushing hers. "The beginning of everything." They had not just built a city, they had created a space where others could shape their destinies, a place where dreams could grow, evolve, and flourish. The future was no longer a distant possibility, it was something they were living, building together. Lyra turned toward him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We've created something beautiful, Avon. But I think it's more than we ever imagined." "We didn't do it alone," Avon replied. "We did it together with the help of those who came before us, and those who will come after us. Evermore is a place for everyone, where every person, every dream, every voice is part of the fabric." For the first time in a long while, Lyra felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. She could see it now: the city, the people, the future. It was all a living, breathing testament to their journey. It was a place of love, creation, and growth. It was the legacy they had left behind, not just for themselves, but for all who believed in its power. They turned together toward the center of the plaza, where the fountain of light continued to flow, its water reflecting the starlight above. It was the heart of the city, the symbol of everything Evermore stood for. It had been there since the beginning, and it would continue to be there, standing as a reminder that no matter how far the city grew, it would always remain rooted in the very essence of creation. Lyra and Avon stepped forward, their footsteps echoing softly in the night. As they walked through the plaza, they saw the faces of the people who had helped build this place: the artists, the builders, the visionaries, the dreamers. Together, they had created something magnificent. But the work wasn't finished. It was an ongoing process, a continual evolution. They stopped in the center of the plaza, surrounded by the people they had come to care for, the people who had become the heartbeat of Evermore. They stood together, united in their shared purpose, their shared vision. Lyra and Avon looked at each other, their hearts full of love and hope for the future. "We did it," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with quiet pride. "We did," Avon agreed, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "But this is just the beginning. Evermore will live, will grow, will thrive. Together." And so, standing in the heart of the city they had created, Lyra and Avon knew that their journey had led them to something greater than themselves. Evermore was not just a place, it was a living, breathing testament to the power of choice, the strength of community, and the endless potential for creation. The future was bright, and the legacy of Evermore would continue to grow, shaped by every voice, every hand, every heart that touched it.